I'm Brooke, 23 years old, and I never thought a regular Tuesday family dinner would change my entire life. One minute I was passing the mashed potatoes, the next I was homeless. 3 months after my art school graduation, still jobless and living under my parents' roof, my father looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You have no home here anymore." My mother nodded in agreement, adding I had 1 week to leave. The shock froze me in place, fork suspended midair. Before I continue this story, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments, hit subscribe, and stick around to see how I turned the worst night of my life into the best thing that ever happened to me. Growing up in suburban Boston, I always knew my parents had high expectations. My father, Richard, worked as a financial advisor who measured success in promotions and salary increases. My mother, Karen, was an elementary school principal with a rigid view of acceptable career paths. Together they created a household where achievement wasn't celebrated, it was expected. My younger brother Kevin somehow managed to fit perfectly into their mold. For years younger than me, he excelled at everything practical, math competitions, debate team, and eventually a business major at their alma mater. While they attended every one of his debate tournaments, they only came to one of my art shows in high school, leaving early with tight smiles and comments about interesting hobbies. Despite their disapproval, art was the only thing that made sense to me. I spent hours in my bedroom sketching, painting, and creating mixed media pieces that expressed what I couldn't say aloud in our achievement-oriented household. My high school art teacher, Ms. Miller, was the first adult who truly saw my potential. She helped me put together a portfolio strong enough to earn a scholarship to the Massachusetts College of Art and Design. The scholarship covered about 60% of my tuition, impressive but not enough to prevent the fight that erupted when I announced my college choice. My parents had already mapped out my future, business school, preferably finance, at their Ivy League alma mater. "Art is a hobby, Brooke, not a career," my father said, his voice carrying that familiar dismissive tone that made me feel 2 inches tall. "We didn't sacrifice for 18 years to watch you throw your life away." My mother's approach was more subtle but equally damaging. "Honey, we just want security for you. None of those artist friends of mine from college can support themselves. They're all teaching or working in graphic design firms doing corporate logos." After weeks of arguments, they reluctantly agreed to pay the remaining tuition with constant reminders of their investment in me. Every holiday break, every phone call included some variation of "that's another $5,000 down the drain" whenever I mentioned a challenging art project. College became my sanctuary. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who didn't question my passion or talent. My professors pushed me to develop my mixed media style, combining traditional painting with found objects and digital elements. By senior year, I had a cohesive portfolio and a clear artistic voice. What I didn't have was a job lined up after graduation. The economy had taken a downturn during my final semester. Galleries were cutting back, design firms had hiring freezes, and even my classmates with more commercial skills were struggling to find work. When I walked across the stage to receive my fine arts degree 3 months ago, I had no choice but to move back home temporarily while job hunting. From day one, the arrangement was tense. My parents established rules as if I were still in high school. Curfews, chore charts, and mandatory family dinners. I tried to be grateful, waking up early to search job boards and sending out applications to any remotely art-related position within 50 miles. The rejections piled up quickly. For every 20 applications, I might get one form email declining my candidacy. When I did land interviews, they ended with "we've decided to go with someone with more experience," or worse, "we've decided not to fill this position due to budget constraints." As weeks turned into months, my parents' comments grew increasingly pointed. My father would leave job listings for office administrator positions on my bed. My mother started referring to me as their residential freelancer when talking to relatives on the phone. "We didn't pay for 4 years of college for you to sit around painting in our garage," my father said one morning as I worked on a new portfolio piece. "When are you going to get a real job?" I tried explaining that building a portfolio was part of the job search in creative fields, but he walked away before I finished my sentence. The week before the fateful dinner, tensions reached new heights. My father's financial planning firm had announced layoffs, putting him on edge about money. My mother had just attended her college roommate's daughter's law school graduation and couldn't stop comparing our career trajectories. Meanwhile, I had received 3 more rejections, including one from a local gallery where I'd been hoping to at least volunteer. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. My mother asked what I wanted for dinner that Tuesday, something she hadn't done since my birthday months earlier. Kevin was unusually quiet, avoiding eye contact whenever we passed in the hallway. There was a strange tension in the air, like the pressure before a thunderstorm, but I was too caught up in my own disappointment to notice. That Tuesday morning, I received a rejection from what I considered my dream job, assistant curator at a small contemporary art museum. I'd made it through 3 rounds of interviews, submitted a special project, and truly believed I had a chance. The rejection email was kind but final. They had selected someone with 5 years of gallery experience. I spent the day applying to retail jobs, coffee shops, and anything else that might hire me, swallowing my pride with each application. By dinner time, I was emotionally exhausted but trying to stay positive. I had no idea I was walking into an ambush that would leave me homeless by dessert. Our dining room had always been the site of family announcements, arguments, and occasional celebrations. That night, the formal cherrywood table was set with the good dishes, the ones my mother usually reserved for Thanksgiving and Christmas. The center candles were lit, and the air smelled of my favorite meal. Her special lasagna with garlic bread and Caesar salad. "Wow, what's the occasion?" I asked, trying to sound upbeat as I took my usual seat across from Kevin. "Just thought we'd have something nice tonight," my mother replied, her smile not quite reaching her eyes as she placed the steaming lasagna on the table. Kevin stared down at his empty plate, shoulders hunched. At 19, he still lived at home while attending the local university as a business major. My parents never questioned his decision to save money by commuting, that was financial responsibility. My returning home was failure to launch. My father entered last, tucking his phone into his pocket after checking his work emails, a habit my mother usually scolded him for at dinner. Tonight, she said nothing as he took his seat at the head of the table. "How's everyone's day been?" My mother asked as she served the lasagna, starting with my father's plate. "Productive," my father answered curtly. "The Johnson account is finally settled." Kevin muttered something about a good exam grade, while I mentioned applying to several jobs without going into detail about the museum rejection. The conversation lulled as we ate, with only the clink of silverware against plates filling the silence. Halfway through the meal, my father cleared his throat. "So, Brooke, any promising leads today?" "A few possibilities," I said cautiously. I applied at Barton's bookstore and Central Coffee downtown. The coffee shop is near that gallery on 5th Street, so maybe I could make some connections there. My father's jaw tightened. Coffee shops and bookstores. For years of college for minimum wage jobs. "It's temporary," I explained for what felt like the 100th time. "Breaking into the art world takes time. I need something to pay bills while I build my portfolio and make connections." "You know," my mother interjected, "I talked to Aunt Linda yesterday. Your cousin Jessica just got promoted at her marketing firm. 2 years out of college and she's already making $60,000 a year with benefits." "Good for Jessica," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral while pushing lasagna around my plate. Marketing was always her thing. "At least it's a real career," my father said. "Not some pipe dream." I put my fork down. "Art is a real career, Dad. Just because it doesn't follow your 9-to-5 corporate timeline doesn't make it invalid." "Invalid?" My father's voice rose. "What's invalid is spending 4 years and $80,000 of our money for you to end up applying at coffee shops. Your brother will graduate with job offers lined up. He chose a practical field." Kevin seemed to shrink in his chair, suddenly very interested in his garlic bread. "I'm trying," I said, feeling heat rise to my face. "The job market is tough right now, especially in creative fields. I just need some time. Time? My father laughed without humor. You've had 3 months of time, living under our roof, eating our food, using our electricity to power your computer while you paint pictures no one wants to buy. The words stung like a physical slap. That's not fair. I've applied to over 100 positions. I've had interviews. I'm working on commission pieces for people. Building a creative career doesn't happen overnight. Maybe it doesn't happen at all, my mother said, her voice softer but somehow more cutting. Honey, we're concerned you're chasing a fantasy instead of building a real future. This is my real future, I insisted, feeling tears threatening. Just because it doesn't look like what you wanted for me doesn't make it wrong. My father put his napkin down firmly. Here's the situation, Brooke. We've supported you through college as we promised. That was our obligation as parents. But we're not going to support an adult who refuses to make practical choices. What are you saying? I asked, though a part of me already knew. I'm saying it's time for an ultimatum, he continued, his voice hard as granite. Either you find a real job, not a coffee shop, not a bookstore, but a real job with benefits and a future, or you need to find somewhere else to live. The room went silent. Even my mother looked slightly taken aback by his bluntness. You're giving me an ultimatum about my entire career path? I asked incredulously. You want me to abandon everything I've worked for, everything I care about, to take some corporate job I'll hate just to meet your definition of success? We want you to be realistic, my mother cut in. There are plenty of creative jobs in business. Marketing, design departments. That's not my art, I interrupted. I'm not going to spend my life designing corporate logos or advertisement layouts just because it comes with dental insurance. My father's face flushed red. Then I guess you've made your choice. You have no home here anymore. The words hung in the air like smoke. I looked to my mother, expecting her to soften his declaration, to mediate as she often did during our arguments. Instead, she nodded. 1 week, she said quietly. You have 1 week to make arrangements and move out. I turned to Kevin, hoping for some support, but he stared at his plate, refusing to make eye contact. You're kicking me out? I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Because I won't give up on my dream? We're helping you face reality, my father replied. Sometimes children need a push to grow up. I am grown up, I said, standing so quickly my chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Grown up enough to know I won't sacrifice my passion and talent just because you don't understand or value it. Then you're grown up enough to support yourself, my mother said with finality. I looked at each of them. My father's stern face, my mother's tight lips, my brother's averted eyes, and realized I was alone in what was supposed to be my family. Without another word, I left the dining room and went upstairs to my bedroom, closing the door behind me before the tears could fall. I leaned against the door, sliding down until I sat on the floor, surrounded by my artwork, sketchbooks, and the remnants of a childhood that had just been erased with a single dinner conversation. In 1 week, I would be homeless. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on my childhood bed staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck on the ceiling when I was 12. They had once represented my dreams, bright, constant, guiding. Now they just looked faded and childish. My mind raced through options, each more depressing than the last. I had exactly $2,417 in my bank account, my graduation money plus what I'd earned from selling a few small pieces at my senior showcase. In Boston's rental market, that wouldn't even cover first and last month's rent plus security deposit on the tiniest studio apartment. Around 3 in the morning, I pulled out my laptop and created a spreadsheet of everyone I knew who might let me crash temporarily. The list was embarrassingly short. Most of my college friends had moved back to their hometowns across the country, or were living with 5 roommates in tiny apartments, or had parents who had helped them with security deposits on their first places. When dawn broke, I hadn't slept but had a plan, or at least the rough outline of one. First, I would try to talk to my parents individually, hoping that without the audience, one of them might relent. If that failed, I would call Madison, my best friend since middle school, who had her own small apartment in Cambridge. I waited until I heard my mother in the kitchen making coffee, then ventured downstairs. She was standing by the counter, staring out the window with a mug in her hand. "Mom?" I said softly. She turned, her expression carefully neutral. "Good morning. Can we talk about last night? Just you and me?" She took a sip of coffee before answering. "Your father and I are united on this, Brooke. We've discussed it extensively." "So this wasn't a heat-of-the-moment thing? You've been planning to kick me out?" She winced at my phrasing. "We've been concerned about your direction for a while. We think you need a push to make more practical choices." "By making me homeless?" I couldn't keep the hurt from my voice. "Don't be dramatic. You're not going to be homeless. You have friends, or you could take one of those jobs you applied for and find roommates." She placed her mug in the sink. "This is for your own good. Sometimes life requires tough love." I realized then that she wasn't going to budge. This wasn't an impulsive decision made in anger. They had calculated this move, probably discussed it for weeks while smiling at me across the dinner table. My father was equally unmoved when I approached him in his home office later that morning. "Dad, please. Just give me a little more time. The job market is tough right now." He barely looked up from his computer. "The job market is always tough for impractical degrees. That's why we advised against art school in the first place." "So this is punishment? Because I didn't take your career advice 4 years ago?" "This is a life lesson, Brooke. Actions have consequences. Choices have outcomes. You chose your path, now you need to walk it, without us carrying you." My last hope was Kevin. I found him in his room, headphones on, textbook open on his desk. When I knocked, he jumped as if caught doing something wrong. "Hey," he said awkwardly, removing his headphones. "Did you know?" I asked directly. "About their plan to kick me out?" He looked down, guilt written across his face. "They mentioned something last week. I thought they were just venting. I didn't think they'd actually do it." "And you didn't think to warn me?" Kevin fidgeted with his pen. "I'm sorry, Brooke. I should have said something." "You could say something now," I suggested. "Stand up for me." His expression turned pained. "You know I can't. Dad's already talking about how he might not be able to cover my tuition next year if his company does another round of layoffs. I can't risk." "Risk what? Being treated like me?" I interrupted, suddenly angry at his cowardice. "Got it. Self-preservation. Very practical of you." I turned to leave, but he called after me. "Brooke, wait. Maybe if you just got some office job temporarily, they'd back off. You could still do art on the side." "That's exactly what they want, for me to give up and fall in line." "I won't do it, Kev. Not even to make my life easier." He looked at me with a mixture of admiration and pity. "Where will you go?" "I'll figure it out," I said, more confidently than I felt. Back in my room, I called Madison. We'd been friends since 7th grade, through every awkward phase and life milestone. She was working as a paralegal while studying for the LSAT. "They did what?" she practically shouted through the phone when I explained the situation. "Gave me a week to get out," I repeated, the reality sinking in as I said it aloud. "That's insane. Over an art degree? Parents are supposed to be supportive." "Not mine, apparently." I took a deep breath. "Maddie, I hate to ask, but is there any chance?" "You can stay with me," she said before I could finish. "My couch is yours for as long as you need it." Relief washed over me. "Are you sure?" "I don't know how long it will take to find a job and save enough for my own place." 2 weeks, minimum, she stated firmly. "Longer if you need it. That's what friends are for." With a temporary landing spot secured, I spent the next 5 days in a frenzy of activity. I applied to every job listing I could find, regardless of field. I sold my old textbooks online for extra cash. I sorted through all my belongings, making painful decisions about what to keep and what to donate or leave behind. My parents maintained a cold distance, speaking to me only when necessary. They seemed almost surprised that I was actually packing, as if they'd expected me to break down and beg for forgiveness, promising to abandon my artistic aspirations for a business degree. On my final day, I loaded everything I could fit into my 10-year-old Honda Civic: clothes, essential art supplies, my laptop, and a few sentimental items. The car was so packed that the rearview mirror was useless. My life had been reduced to what could fit in a compact sedan. My father was in the driveway washing his car when I carried out the last box. "You're really going through with this," he said, more statement than question. "Did you think I wouldn't?" I asked, slamming my trunk closed with effort. "I thought you might come to your senses." He turned off the hose, wrapping it methodically. "You can still change your mind. Get a business certificate online, apply for entry-level positions at my firm." I could put in a word. "At the cost of everything that matters to me," I replied. "No thanks." He shook his head. "You'll learn the hard way, then. Life isn't about following passions, it's about stability, security, building something substantial. Maybe your life is. Mine won't be." My mother appeared at the front door but didn't come down the steps. "Do you have somewhere to go?" she asked, a flicker of concern in her voice. "Yes," I answered simply, not elaborating. Let them wonder if I was sleeping in my car. Kevin came out last, awkwardly handing me a sealed envelope. "Some gas money," he whispered. "It's not much." I took it, nodding my thanks. We didn't hug. It felt like too much had broken between us. The drive to Madison's apartment was a blur of tears and anger. I had to pull over twice when the crying made it impossible to see the road. By the time I parked outside her building in Cambridge, I felt hollow, scraped empty of emotion. Madison helped me carry my essentials up to her fifth-floor walk-up. Her apartment was tiny. A studio with a kitchenette barely big enough for a mini-fridge and microwave. The couch that would be my bed for the foreseeable future was actually a love seat that would leave my feet dangling off the end when I slept. "It's not much," she apologized, clearing magazines from the coffee table. "It's everything," I said honestly. "You saved me." That night, curled up under a borrowed blanket on a too-small couch, I finally let myself face the truth. I was essentially homeless, jobless, and nearly broke. The life I had planned, gradually building my portfolio while having the security of my parents' home, was gone. I had nothing but my art, my ancient car, and $2,400 standing between me and complete disaster. I cried myself to sleep that first night, trying to muffle the sound in my pillow so Madison wouldn't hear from her bed on the other side of the room divider. Rock bottom felt exactly like this love seat, too small, too hard, and not designed for comfort. Madison's 2-week offer quickly stretched toward its end, and my panic grew with each passing day. I'd wake up before she did, quietly folding my blankets and trying to make myself as unobtrusive as possible. I'd leave with her when she went to work, spending my days in coffee shops using their free Wi-Fi to apply for jobs, or in the public library when I couldn't afford to buy anything. By the 10th day, I'd had 3 interviews, one at a corporate office supply store, one at a sandwich shop, and one at a call center. None had called back yet. My bank account had dwindled to just under $2,000 after buying groceries to contribute to Madison's kitchen and putting gas in my car. "You can stay longer," Madison insisted over dinner one night, ramen noodles with frozen vegetables thrown in for nutrition. "Really, I don't mind." "You're in a studio apartment," I pointed out. "You have no privacy. Your bathroom door doesn't even close properly because my portfolio case is leaning against it. So? We're friends. This is temporary." "Exactly. Temporary. Which means I need to find something more permanent, fast." The next morning, I met my former classmate Emily for coffee. She had graduated a year before me and was working at the Atherton Gallery, a small but respected space in downtown Boston. I couldn't afford the coffee, but she was buying, and I was desperate enough to accept. "You look exhausted," she said bluntly as I slid into the seat across from her. "Thanks. That's exactly what an unemployed, homeless person wants to hear." Her eyes widened. "Homeless? What happened with your parents?" I gave her the condensed version, trying to keep my voice steady as I described the ultimatum and eviction. "That's brutal," she said when I finished. "My parents weren't thrilled about my art history degree either, but they never threatened to kick me out." "Lucky you," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "Listen," Emily leaned forward, "I can't get you a job at the gallery. We're barely keeping the lights on as it is. But the cafe next door is hiring baristas. The pay is minimum wage plus tips, but the manager lets the staff hang artwork on the walls. Several people have sold pieces that way." It wasn't ideal, far from my dreams of curating exhibitions or creating commissioned artwork for collectors, but it was something. After finishing coffee with Emily, I walked straight to Muse Cafe and filled out an application. The manager, a tattooed woman named Jill, interviewed me on the spot. "Experience?" she asked, glancing over my application. "None with coffee, but I'm a fast learner," I admitted. "I worked retail during summers in college and waited tables for a semester." "Art student?" she guessed, noticing the Massachusetts College of Art and Design listed under education. "Graduate. Recently." She nodded knowingly. "We get a lot of you. The gallery brings in the artsy crowd, and they like baristas who can talk about more than the weather." She handed me back my application. "Training starts Monday, 8 a.m. Don't be late." I almost hugged her but settled for a professional thank you instead. Walking back to my car, I felt a small weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't much, but it was income. The next challenge was housing. With a job secured, I needed to find somewhere to live that wouldn't eat up my entire paycheck. Madison helped me search apartment listings, but everything in the city was far beyond what I could afford on barista wages. Finally, I found a listing for a room in a shared house in Somerville, 5 residents, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with strict shelf assignments in the refrigerator. The rent was still high at $800 a month, but it included utilities, and I was desperate. The house was a rundown Victorian divided into oddly shaped rooms. My room was actually part of what had once been a larger bedroom, now split by a thin wall that didn't quite reach the ceiling. I could hear everything my neighbor did, and she could certainly hear me. The landlord, an elderly man who seemed confused about which room he was showing me, kept referring to it as cozy and perfect for a student. "I'll take it," I said before he'd even finished his sales pitch. I couldn't afford to be picky. Moving in was depressing. My few possessions barely filled the tiny space. I set up my art supplies under the room's single window, arranged my clothes in the shallow closet, and made the twin bed with sheets Madison had given me as a housewarming gift. When everything was in place, I sat on the bed and looked around at my new life. "Well," I said aloud to the empty room, "at least it's mine." Training at Muse Cafe was intense. I burned my fingers on the espresso machine, confused drink orders, and spilled more milk than I successfully steamed. But by the end of the first week, I could make a decent latte and remember most of the regular customers' orders. The tips were unpredictable. Some days I'd make $50, other days barely 15. Between the minimum wage base pay and tips, I was making just enough to cover rent and basic necessities. There was nothing left for savings, let alone art supplies. I developed a strict budget. Ramen noodles became a dietary staple. I shopped exclusively at thrift stores. I walked to work when the weather permitted to save on gas. Every penny was accounted for, every purchase questioned. Do I really need this? Can I go without? What's the absolute cheapest option? About a month after being kicked out, I ran into Kevin at a convenience store near my work. I was counting change to see if I could afford both ramen and a carton of eggs when I heard his voice. "Brooke?" I looked up, startled. He stood there in his university hoodie, holding an energy drink and looking shocked to see me. "Hey," I said, quickly pocketing my sad handful of coins. "How are you?" he asked, then winced at the banality of the question. "Living the dream," I replied sarcastically. "You?" "I'm okay. Classes are tough this semester." He shuffled awkwardly. "Mom and Dad ask about you sometimes." "I'm sure they do." I grabbed just the ramen and headed toward the register. Kevin followed. "They thought you'd come back, you know. After a week or so. Dad said you'd realize how hard it is out there and come home with a new perspective." I stopped and turned to face him. "You mean they kicked me out thinking I'd fail so completely that I'd crawl back and abandon my dreams? That was the plan?" He had the decency to look ashamed. "Something like that." "Well, you can tell them I'm doing just fine." The lie tasted bitter. "I have an apartment and a job. I'm making it work." "Are you?" "Because you look." "What?" "I look what, Kevin?" My voice rose slightly, causing the cashier to glance our way. "Tired," he finished lamely. "You look tired." "I am tired. I work opening shifts at a cafe, which means I'm up at 5 a.m. I share a bathroom with 4 strangers. I eat ramen more often than not. But you know what? I'm still making art. Every day, even if it's just for 30 minutes before I collapse into bed. So yes, I'm tired, but I haven't given up. I haven't let them win." Kevin was quiet for a moment. "I admire that," he finally said. "I don't think I could do it." "You'll never have to," I replied. "You chose the approved path." As I paid for my ramen, Kevin awkwardly offered to give me money. I declined. Pride was one of the few things I had left that didn't cost anything to maintain. Walking back to my house that evening, his words echoed in my mind. They thought I'd come crawling back. The realization was both painful and clarifying. My parents hadn't kicked me out to teach me independence, they'd done it to break me, to force me to conform to their vision for my life. That night, sitting on my twin bed eating ramen noodles out of the pot I'd cooked them in, I hit rock bottom emotionally. I wasn't just struggling financially, I was grappling with the knowledge that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had deliberately set me up to fail, expecting me to abandon everything I cared about just to regain their approval. I cried that night, harder than I had since the initial shock of being kicked out. I cried for the family support I'd never truly had, for the struggle I was facing, for the fear that maybe they were right, maybe I couldn't make it as an artist in this world. Maybe I was foolish to even try. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a strange sense of clarity. If they wanted me to fail, then succeeding would be the best revenge. I couldn't control my circumstances right now, but I could control how I responded to them. I could keep making art, keep pushing forward, keep believing in myself even when no one else did. It was a small shift in perspective, but it felt monumental, like finding solid ground after treading water for weeks. I was at rock bottom, yes, but now I could start climbing. Working at Muse Cafe quickly became a strange blessing in disguise. The early morning shifts were brutal, but they left my afternoons free for job hunting and creating art. I'd bring my sketchbook to work and draw during breaks, often capturing the interesting faces of our regular customers. About 6 weeks into the job, I was sketching a particularly striking older woman with fascinating laugh lines when Jill noticed my work. "You're actually good," she said, sounding surprised as she peered over my shoulder. "Don't sound so shocked," I replied with a small smile. "No, I mean really good. You capture expressions well." She studied the sketch more closely. "Most of the artists who work here can barely draw stick figures. They're more into abstract concepts and found object installations. I do mixed media too," I explained. "But traditional skills are the foundation of everything else." She nodded thoughtfully. "Ever think about hanging some of your work here? We rotate the wall art monthly." I hadn't considered it, assuming the cafe walls were reserved for established local artists, not baristas. But I eagerly accepted the offer, promising to bring in some finished pieces for her approval. That weekend, I stayed up late in my tiny room, completing 3 new mixed-media portraits that incorporated elements of Boston's urban landscape with human figures. They weren't my best work, art supplies were expensive, and I was working with leftover materials from college, but they represented my style and technical skills. Jill approved them immediately, and by Monday afternoon, my work hung on the brick wall near the cafe's entrance. I added small discreet price tags that felt simultaneously too expensive, given my insecurities, and too cheap, given the hours of work involved. To my shock, the first piece sold within a week to a regular customer who'd watched me create it during my breaks. The second sold the following week to a woman who worked at the gallery next door. The sales weren't life-changing, $300 total, but the validation was priceless. More importantly, the exposure led to an unexpected opportunity. Rebecca Chen, the owner of the Atherton Gallery where Emily worked, came into the cafe one afternoon while I was on shift. I recognized her immediately from gallery events I'd attended as a student. "You're the artist," she said when I handed her the almond milk latte she'd ordered. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I confirmed, trying not to seem too eager. "I have work on the wall by the entrance." "I know." Emily pointed it out. "I like your technique." She took a sip of her latte. "We're installing a new exhibition next week. Contemporary mixed media. Our installation assistant just quit. Emily mentioned you might be interested." My heart raced. "Absolutely. I have experience with installation from college exhibitions. It's just part-time, project-based. Helping artists install their work, lighting, arrangement, that sort of thing." "That's perfect," I said quickly. "I'm very familiar with installation requirements for different media." She handed me her card. "Come by tomorrow after your shift. We'll discuss details." I managed to maintain professional composure until she left, then did a silent dance behind the counter that made Jill roll her eyes, though she was smiling too. The installation assistant position paid barely more than my barista job, but it connected me directly to the art world I'd been struggling to enter. I continued working mornings at the cafe, then spent afternoons at the gallery helping prepare for the upcoming exhibition. The featured artist was Marcus Rivera, a mid-career mixed-media artist whose work I'd studied in school. Meeting him in person was intimidating, but he turned out to be surprisingly down-to-earth and practical. "You're the new installation assistant?" he asked when Rebecca introduced us. "Yes, and a huge admirer of your work," I admitted. "Your Urban Decay series was part of my thesis research." He seemed pleased by this. "What's your medium?" "Mixed media, like yours, but more figurative. I combine traditional portraiture with found objects and digital elements." His interest piqued. He asked to see my portfolio. I hesitated, suddenly self-conscious about showing my student work to an established artist, but Rebecca encouraged me. "Always show your work when asked," she whispered as I pulled up images on my phone. "Worst case, you get valuable feedback." Marcus scrolled through my portfolio thoughtfully. "You have solid technical skills," he finally said. "Your integration of three-dimensional elements needs refinement, but the concept is strong. You're capturing something authentic about human experience." Coming from him, it was high praise. I thanked him, trying not to sound as emotional as I felt. After weeks of questioning my choices and talents, having a respected artist validate my work was overwhelming. "I need an assistant in my studio for this project," he continued, turning to Rebecca. "Someone who understands my approach but has their own perspective. Would you mind if I borrowed her a few days a week?" Rebecca agreed, and suddenly I had a third job, studio assistant to Marcus Rivera. The position paid slightly better than the gallery work and offered something even more valuable, mentorship from a successful working artist. Marcus's studio was a converted warehouse space in Somerville, not far from my shared house. 3 days a week, I'd help him prepare materials, assist with technical aspects of his pieces, and occasionally contribute ideas to overcome creative challenges. In return, he offered candid feedback on my own work and practical advice about navigating the art world. Most artists fail because they can't adapt, he told me one afternoon as we arranged metal fragments for a new piece. Not their art, their approach to making a living from it. The starving artist who never compromises is usually just an unemployed artist with an ego problem. My parents think art isn't a real career at all, I admitted, carefully gluing a piece of rusted metal to the canvas. Let me guess, they wanted business school? When I nodded, he laughed. My father wanted me to be a dentist. Can you imagine these hands cleaning teeth? He held up his paint-stained fingers. How did you convince them you could succeed? I didn't, he said simply. I showed them. Words don't change minds, results do. His advice resonated deeply. I'd been so focused on defending my choices that I hadn't put that energy into proving them wrong through action. Meanwhile, a regular customer at the cafe had noticed me sketching portraits during breaks and asked if I'd create a custom piece for his wife's birthday. He offered $500, more than I made in a week at the cafe. I accepted immediately, creating a mixed-media portrait incorporating elements from their travels together. He was so pleased with the result that he recommended me to friends, leading to 2 more commissions. With these small successes building, I decided to establish a more formal online presence. I created social media accounts dedicated to my artwork, posting process videos and finished pieces. I started a simple website showcasing my portfolio and offering commission information. The response was modest but encouraging, a few hundred followers, occasional inquiries, and engagement from other artists. As autumn turned to winter, my financial situation gradually improved. Between the cafe, gallery work, studio assistants, and occasional commissions, I was making enough to cover rent, buy better food, and even set aside a small amount for art supplies. I was still far from comfortable, but the constant panic about basic survival had subsided. The most significant opportunity came about 3 months after I'd started working at the gallery. Rebecca approached me as I was adjusting lighting for a new installation. We're planning a small group exhibition for emerging artists in January, she said. 3 or 4 artists sharing the back gallery space. We'd like to include your work. I nearly fell off the ladder. Seriously? My work in an actual gallery show? Don't sound so shocked, she echoed my words from months earlier with a smile. You've been doing good work here, and your technical skills are solid. It's a small corner of a group show, not a solo exhibition at MoMA, but everyone starts somewhere. The validation was overwhelming. After months of struggling and questioning my choices, here was tangible evidence that I was on the right path. I had an exhibition opportunity at a legitimate gallery, the exact type of stepping stone I'd been hoping for when I graduated. That evening, I sat in my tiny room looking at my most recent pieces, considering which might be suitable for the exhibition. For the first time since being kicked out, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for what had happened. As painful as it had been, my parents' ultimatum had forced me to build a life that was authentically mine, to make connections and find opportunities one might never have pursued if I'd stayed in the comfort of their home. The thought struck me with unexpected clarity: being kicked out might have been the best thing that ever happened to me. It had been brutal and terrifying, but it had also been liberating. Without the safety net of my parents' home and approval, I'd been forced to create my own support system, to find people who valued my work and perspective. My phone buzzed with a text from Kevin. Mom found article about gallery in Boston Magazine. Saw your name as staff. They're asking questions. Thought you should know. I stared at the message, a complex mix of emotions washing over me. Part of me wanted to ignore it completely. Another part wanted to send a scathing response about their sudden interest now that I had a legitimate connection to share. Instead, I simply replied, "Thanks for the heads up." For the first time, I realized I didn't need their approval anymore. I had found my own way, my own community, my own validation. The journey had been harder than it needed to be, but the destination was becoming clearer every day. I was an artist, with or without their blessing. 6 months after being kicked out of my parents' house, my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined during those first desperate weeks. The tiny room in the shared house still felt cramped, but I'd made it mine, with artwork covering the walls and organized supplies tucked into every available space. My schedule had evolved into a manageable routine. I still worked part-time at the cafe. The steady income and free coffee were too valuable to give up, but I'd reduced my hours to make more time for gallery work and my own art. My role at Atherton Gallery had expanded from installation assistance to part-time gallery assistant, helping with everything from hanging shows to managing sales and communicating with artists. Marcus continued to provide mentorship, occasionally hiring me for specific projects in his studio. More importantly, he introduced me to other working artists and collectors, expanding my network beyond what I could have built on my own as a recent graduate. The group exhibition in January exceeded all expectations. I displayed 5 pieces in my corner of the gallery, including 2 new works created specifically for the show. On opening night, I stood nervously in a thrift store dress I'd altered to look more fashionable, watching as strangers examined my work, sometimes leaning in close to study the details or stepping back to take in the full composition. "You look terrified," Madison whispered, handing me a plastic cup of cheap wine from the refreshment table. She'd been my rock throughout the entire journey, never complaining about my extended stay on her couch or the emotional roller coaster I'd brought into her life. I admitted. "What if everyone hates it?" "Too late," she grinned, pointing across the room. "That guy with the expensive watch just put a red dot on your price list." Sure enough, a middle-aged man in a tailored suit was speaking with Rebecca while gesturing toward my largest piece. A mixed-media portrait incorporating elements of urban architecture and fabric that I'd titled "Constructed Identity." The red dot on the price list indicated a sale. By the end of the opening reception, I'd sold 3 of my 5 pieces for a total of $2,800, more than I typically made in 2 months. After the gallery's 40% commission, I still had enough to finally move out of the shared house into a slightly better living situation. Within a week, I found a small apartment with a roommate, Zoe, a music teacher who kept regular hours and didn't mind me setting up a studio space in the corner of the living room. The apartment was still in Somerville, still old and a bit shabby, but it had reliable heat, no mysterious odors, and a functioning kitchen where I could cook real meals instead of surviving on ramen and peanut butter sandwiches. As winter turned to spring, my professional reputation in the local art scene continued to grow. The Boston Globe ran a small feature on emerging artists that mentioned my work in the Atherton show. A local arts blog interviewed me about my mixed media techniques. Another gallery across town asked if I'd be interested in participating in their summer exhibition. With each small success, I gained confidence not just in my artwork but in my decision to pursue art as a career. The validation from people in the industry, gallery owners, established artists, collectors, helped silence the doubts that had plagued me since childhood. Maybe I wasn't going to get rich, but I could make a living doing what I loved. One Tuesday morning in April, I was working the early shift at the cafe when the door chimed and my brother Kevin walked in. I hadn't seen him since our chance encounter at the convenience store months earlier, though he occasionally sent brief text messages checking in. "Hey," he said awkwardly, approaching the counter. "Can we talk? When you're not busy?" I glanced at the nearly empty cafe. "Now works." "What's up?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Mom and Dad saw the article about you in the Globe." "And?" I kept my voice neutral, though my stomach tightened. "They were surprised. Dad especially. I think he's realizing you might actually make this work." Kevin hesitated. "They've been asking a lot of questions about you. How you're doing, where you're living." "I'm sure they have," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Now that there's public validation, suddenly they're interested. "I think they miss you," Kevin said quietly. In their own weird, emotionally stunted way. They have a funny way of showing it. 6 months of silence, and now they're curious because a newspaper mentioned me? Kevin had the decency to look embarrassed. Yeah, it's messed up. I know. My shift manager signaled that a customer needed help, giving me a moment to collect my thoughts. After finishing the order, I returned to Kevin. Do they want something from me? I asked directly. They want to reconnect. Mom suggested a family dinner. I laughed without humor. The scene of the crime? No thanks. I'm not defending them, Kevin said quickly. What they did was wrong. I should have stood up for you then, and I didn't. I'm sorry for that. His apology caught me off guard. Thanks, I said, genuinely touched by his admission. That means a lot. So, would you consider meeting them? Not at the house. Neutral territory. I considered his request. 6 months ago, I would have jumped at the chance to reconcile, desperate for their approval and support. Now, I wasn't so sure I needed either. I'll think about it, I finally said. That's all I can promise right now. Kevin nodded, understanding this was the best he would get. Before leaving, he asked for my address, wanting to see my new apartment and art studio. I gave it to him, along with an invitation to stop by that weekend. True to his word, Kevin visited that Saturday, bringing a housewarming gift of art supplies, good quality ones that showed he'd actually paid attention to what I used in my work. We spent the afternoon catching up, and for the first time in our relationship, he seemed to see me as an equal rather than his struggling older sister. Your work is really good, he said, examining the pieces in progress around my living room studio. I mean, I always knew you were talented, but this is professional level stuff. Thanks, Kev. That means a lot coming from someone who once said my self-portrait looked like a potato with hair. He laughed. I was 12. And to be fair, you did give yourself a weirdly oblong head. It felt good to laugh with him again, to rebuild the connection that had been damaged by our parents' ultimatum and his silence in the face of it. As he was leaving, Kevin paused at the door. They really do want to see you. Would you consider it? Maybe just Mom first? I sighed. I'll think about it. Really think about it. The question of reconciliation occupied my thoughts over the next few weeks. Did I want my parents back in my life? Could we build a healthier relationship now that I wasn't financially dependent on them? Or would they still try to control my choices, just in more subtle ways? Before I could decide, a major opportunity arose that pushed the question temporarily aside. Rebecca introduced me to Lawrence Winters, one of Boston's most prominent art collectors. He had purchased one of my pieces from the group show and wanted to commission a larger work for his office. He's paying $5,000, Rebecca told me when she called with the news. This is big, Brooke. His collection includes Kahlo, Basquiat, emerging artists who later became household names. He has an eye for talent and the resources to back it up. The commission would be my largest yet, both in physical size and payment. It would allow me to quit the cafe entirely, freeing up more time for my own work while still covering my living expenses. I threw myself into the project, creating sketches and material studies, determined to create something worthy of the opportunity. 2 weeks into the commission process, my phone rang with my mother's number. I stared at it for several rings, debating whether to answer. Finally, curiosity won out. Hello? I answered cautiously. Brooke. My mother's voice sounded exactly the same, as if 6 months of silence hadn't passed between us. How are you? I'm well, I replied neutrally. Working on a major commission for a collector. Yes, Kevin mentioned that. It sounds like an important opportunity. An awkward silence followed. I waited, refusing to make this easy for her. We saw the article in the Globe, she finally continued. Your father and I were surprised that I didn't fail completely without your support. I bet you were. She sighed. I deserved that. We handled things poorly, Brooke. You kicked me out with a week's notice because I wouldn't abandon my career for one you approved of. Poorly doesn't begin to cover it. We thought. She hesitated. We thought you needed a push to be practical. We didn't expect you to actually make it work. Her honesty was both refreshing and infuriating. So you wanted me to fail? To come crawling back? We wanted you to understand the realities of the world, she said defensively. Art isn't a stable career path. Neither is anything else these days, Mom. Dad's financial firm had layoffs, remember? There are no guarantees anywhere. Another silence stretched between us. Your father and I would like to see you, she finally said. Perhaps for dinner somewhere? To talk? I thought of the last family dinner we'd shared, how it had shattered my sense of security and belonging. I'm not ready for that, I answered honestly. Maybe someday, but not yet. I understand, she said, though her tone suggested she didn't. Will you at least consider it? For the future? I'll consider it, I agreed. But I need time. After hanging up, I returned to my commission work with renewed focus. Their reappearance in my life now, just as things were starting to go well, felt calculated rather than coincidental. They'd waited until I had external validation, newspaper articles, gallery representation, a significant commission, before deciding I was worth reconnecting with. The Lawrence Winters Commission consumed my creative energy for the next month. I created my most ambitious piece yet, a large-scale mixed-media installation that incorporated traditional portraiture with architectural elements and textural components that changed appearance depending on viewing angle and lighting. When I finally installed it in his downtown office, Winters was visibly pleased. This exceeds my expectations, he said, studying the piece from different angles. You've captured exactly what I was hoping for, but with your unique perspective. Thank you, I said, relief washing over me. I wanted to challenge myself with this piece. Challenge accepted and conquered, he replied with a smile. I have several collector friends who would appreciate your work. Would you mind if I shared your portfolio? That single commission led to 3 more, each building my reputation and financial stability. By summer, I had enough steady work to leave the cafe job entirely, focusing on my art and gallery responsibilities. In July, I received an invitation to feature 3 pieces in a prominent group show titled New Voices in Contemporary Art at one of Boston's most respected galleries. The exhibition would include 15 emerging artists from across New England, with an accompanying catalog and press coverage. The day after receiving the invitation, I found my parents standing outside the Atherton Gallery when I arrived for my shift. What are you doing here? I asked, stopping several feet away from them. My father looked older than I remembered, more lines around his eyes, his posture slightly less rigid. We wanted to see your work in person, he said. Kevin told us you're usually here on Wednesdays. You could have called first. Would you have agreed to see us? My mother asked. I sighed. Probably not. Rebecca appeared at the gallery door, assessing the situation with a quick glance. Everything okay, Brooke? Fine, I assured her. These are my parents. Her eyebrows rose slightly, she knew enough of my story to understand the significance, but she smiled professionally. Would you like to come in? We just hung Brooke's new series yesterday. My parents followed her inside while I lingered momentarily on the sidewalk, gathering my composure. This wasn't how I'd imagined our reunion, if I'd wanted one at all. But perhaps it was fitting that it would happen here, in my professional space, surrounded by evidence of the path they'd tried to discourage me from taking. Inside, I found them studying my newest triptych, 3 interconnected pieces exploring themes of displacement, resilience, and identity. My father stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable as he examined each panel methodically. These are quite powerful, my mother said when she noticed me approaching. The technical skill is evident. Thanks, I replied, unsure how to navigate this strange interaction. My father cleared his throat. You've clearly put your education to good use, he said stiffly. The craftsmanship is impressive. Coming from him, it was practically effusive praise. I nodded, acknowledging his comment without revealing how much I still craved his approval, despite everything. Kevin tells us you're doing well, my mother continued. Your own apartment, gallery representation, commissions. I confirmed. No thanks to being kicked out with a week's notice and no support. My father winced slightly. We may have been hasty in our approach. Hasty? I repeated incredulously. You made me homeless because I wouldn't give up my career for one you approved of. We thought you needed to understand the realities of the world, he defended, though with less conviction than I expected. I understand reality perfectly well now, I said coolly. Including the reality that family support shouldn't be conditional on career choices. Rebecca tactfully retreated to her office, leaving us alone in the gallery space. My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. We'd like to try again, my mother finally said. To rebuild our relationship. We miss you, Brooke. You miss me now that I'm successful enough to be mentioned in the Boston Globe, I pointed out. You didn't miss me when I was sleeping on a friend's couch or eating ramen for every meal. That's not fair, my father started, but my mother touched his arm, silencing him. It is fair, she acknowledged. We reached out after seeing evidence that you were succeeding. That doesn't look good from your perspective. Her admission surprised me. No, it doesn't. Can we start over? She asked. Perhaps have dinner somewhere neutral? Just to talk? I looked at them, the parents who had raised me, supported me through childhood, paid for my education, and then abandoned me when I refused to follow their prescribed path. Despite everything, they were still my family. Imperfect, frustrating, but mine. Dinner, I agreed cautiously. Just talking. No ultimatums, no lectures about practical career choices. Agreed, my father said quickly. As they left, promising to call about dinner arrangements, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Residual anger, cautious hope, and most surprisingly, pity. They had missed witnessing my growth and transformation over these 6 difficult but crucial months. They hadn't seen my rock bottom or my gradual climb out of it. They were arriving at the end of the story, wanting credit for a journey they hadn't participated in. Later that week, we met at a neutral restaurant downtown. The conversation was stilted at first, all of us carefully avoiding sensitive topics. Gradually, as appetizers gave way to entrees, the atmosphere softened slightly. They asked about my work, listening with apparent interest as I explained my current projects and upcoming exhibition. We were wrong, my father said abruptly, setting down his fork. About your career choice. About how we handled things. The admission stunned me into momentary silence. We were worried, my mother added. Art seemed so impractical, so uncertain. We wanted security for you. By making me homeless? I couldn't help asking. My father had the grace to look ashamed. We thought you'd come back after a week or two. Realize how difficult it would be and choose a more practical path. We never imagined you'd actually make it work on your own. I almost didn't, I admitted. Those first few months were brutal. I was barely surviving. Why didn't you come back? My mother asked quietly. Because you were trying to break me, I answered honestly. You wanted me to give up something essential to who I am. Coming back would have meant surrendering my identity, my passion, my purpose. I couldn't do that, even when I was eating ramen every day and sleeping on a love seat. They exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. We're proud of you, my father finally said, the words clearly difficult for him. Not because you've been written up in the paper or because you have gallery representation. We're proud of your determination, your resilience. We'd like to be part of your life again, my mother added. On your terms. I considered their offer, weighing the pain of the past against the possibility of a healthier future relationship. I need boundaries, I said finally. Clear ones. My career choices are non-negotiable. My life decisions are mine to make. I'll listen to advice, but ultimatums and manipulation are deal-breakers. They nodded, agreeing to my terms with surprising readiness. As we parted that evening, I didn't hug them or make promises about regular family dinners. The reconciliation, if it happened at all, would be gradual and cautious. Trust, once broken, couldn't be instantly restored. Walking back to my apartment that night, I realized how much I had changed in just 6 months. The terrified girl who had packed her car with tears streaming down her face was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her worth, who had built a life and career on her own terms. The journey had been unnecessarily painful, but the destination was exactly where I needed to be. 1 year after the dinner that changed everything, I stood in the center of a small but well-respected gallery in Boston's South End, surrounded by 28 pieces of my artwork. My first solo exhibition, titled Reconstructed, Identity After Displacement, represented the culmination of the most challenging and transformative year of my life. The gallery buzzed with conversation as attendees moved from piece to piece, examining my mixed media portraits and installations. I'd spent months preparing, creating new work while refining existing pieces to ensure a cohesive collection that told my story without being overtly autobiographical. Madison arrived first, hugging me tightly. "Look at this," she exclaimed, gesturing around the space. "A year ago you were sleeping on my love seat, and now you have your own exhibition. I'm so proud of you I could burst." Emily came next, followed by other friends from art school and colleagues from the gallery world. Marcus attended with his wife, both offering warm congratulations and thoughtful observations about my artistic evolution. Rebecca moved through the crowd like a proud mentor, introducing me to collectors and critics with genuine enthusiasm for my work. I was discussing my technique with a small group when I spotted them near the entrance, my parents and Kevin, dressed formally and looking somewhat out of place among the eclectic gallery crowd. Kevin waved enthusiastically, while my parents hung back, uncertainty visible in their posture. Our relationship had been cautiously rebuilding over the past few months. Weekly phone calls, occasional coffee meetings, careful conversations that avoided reopening old wounds while acknowledging the hurt that had occurred. Progress was slow but steady, both sides making efforts to understand the other better. I excused myself from the conversation and walked over to greet them. "You came," I said, genuinely pleased despite the lingering awkwardness. "We wouldn't miss it," my mother replied, handing me a small gift bag. "Something for the occasion." Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a palette charm, tasteful and thoughtful in a way that surprised me. "Thank you," I said, touched by the gesture. My father surveyed the gallery, his expression a mixture of admiration and lingering bewilderment at my chosen path. "Impressive turnout," he noted. "The work is striking." From him, it was high praise. I smiled. "Thanks, Dad. Your use of negative space in that centerpiece is particularly effective," he added, gesturing toward my largest installation. "Creates a strong visual impact." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. He'd clearly been researching art terminology, making an effort to engage with my world on its own terms. Kevin grinned at my surprise. "He's been reading art books," he whispered. "Trying to understand what you do." The revelation was unexpectedly moving. My father would never fully understand or appreciate contemporary art, his mind was too practical, too linearly focused, but he was trying, for me. As the evening progressed, the gallery filled with more visitors. To my surprise, several of my pieces sold within the first hour, including the centerpiece, purchased by Lawrence Winters for his private collection. Each sale represented not just financial validation but confirmation that my work resonated with others, that the path I'd fought so hard to pursue had real merit. After the formal portion of the opening concluded, a smaller group of friends and supporters gathered for drinks at a nearby bar. My parents and Kevin joined briefly, making awkward but earnest small talk with my friends before excusing themselves for the drive back to the suburbs. Outside the bar, my mother hugged me goodbye. "We're so proud of you, Brooke," she said quietly. "You've built something remarkable." My father nodded in agreement. "You proved us wrong," he admitted. "About a lot of things. Including my ability to survive being kicked out?" I couldn't resist asking, though without the bitterness that would have colored the question months earlier. He had the grace to look ashamed. Especially that. It was wrong of us. It was, I agreed. But strangely, it might have been the best thing that ever happened to me. They looked surprised by this assessment. If you hadn't kicked me out, I might have stayed in that comfortable bubble indefinitely, applying half-heartedly to jobs, making art in my free time but never fully committing, I explained. Being forced to survive on my own, to build a career from nothing, it made me more determined, more focused, more professional than I might have been otherwise. Still, my mother said, we should have found a better way. Yes, you should have, I agreed. But I've made peace with how things happened. The journey was harder than it needed to be, but I'm proud of where it led. As they left, I rejoined my friends inside, the people who had supported me through my darkest times, who had seen value in my work and my character when my own family had doubted both. Madison raised her glass in a toast. To Brooke, she declared. Artist, survivor, and the most stubborn person I know. Everyone laughed and clinked glasses. The celebration continued late into the night, a joyful acknowledgement of how far I'd come. 1 year later, my life bore little resemblance to those desperate early days of homelessness and uncertainty. My artwork had found its audience, with regular sales and commissions providing a modest but stable income. I maintained my part-time position at Atherton Gallery, valuing the connections and opportunities it provided, while teaching occasional workshops at community art centers. My relationship with my parents continued to evolve, not perfect, but healthier than before. We established clear boundaries and expectations, building a new connection based on mutual respect rather than obligation or control. They would never fully understand my artistic choices, but they had learned to respect them, and I had learned to accept their limitations without internalizing them as judgments on my worth. The tiny apartment with a roommate had given way to a small studio apartment of my own, still modest by most standards but luxurious compared to my shared house days. I had transformed one corner into a dedicated workspace, with organized supplies and proper lighting, a far cry from sketching at cafe tables during breaks. Looking back on that fateful dinner and the year that followed, I realized how profoundly the experience had changed me. Being kicked out had stripped away everything external: parental approval, financial security, comfortable housing, forcing me to identify what truly mattered: my art, my determination, my capacity to build something from nothing. The greatest lesson wasn't about art or career or even family. It was about belonging, recognizing that home isn't necessarily where you grew up or who raised you. Home is where you can be authentically yourself, surrounded by people who value you not despite your choices but because of them. I found that home in unexpected places: in Madison's tiny apartment when she offered her couch without hesitation, in Rebecca's gallery when she saw potential in my work, in Marcus's studio when he treated me as a fellow artist rather than just an assistant, in the community of creators and supporters who believed in my vision even when my own family didn't. Being forced out of one home led me to build another, more authentic one, a home not defined by physical space or family ties but by purpose, passion, and genuine connection. The journey was painful, the struggle real, but the outcome was a life truly my own, built with my own hands and vision. What appeared to be an ending? That devastating moment when my father said, "You have no home here anymore," was actually the beginning of finding where I truly belonged. I hope my story resonates with anyone facing rejection from those who should support them most. Sometimes the hardest push leads to the most important flight. Sometimes losing what you thought was home leads you to build something better, stronger, and more authentically yours. If you've experienced something similar, share your story in the comments. Like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe if you want to hear more stories of overcoming obstacles, and remember, your worth isn't defined by others' approval, but by your courage to live authentically even when it's difficult. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you strength in finding or building your own true home.